Hello everyone, my name is Erik Nijveld, co-founder of technologycatalog.com, the fastest growing technology platform for the energy transition. Most of you on this call are likely already familiar with the platform. If not, then I would like to invite you all after this call to go to the platform, technologycatalog.com, and have a look and browse through the content. Suppliers can use this platform to create visibility for your technologies, and you can thereby choose from different subscriptions, whereby the most basic one is free of charge. End users can use the platform to find and select the most relevant technologies. We can thereby also provide you extra insights to find and select the most relevant ones for your business. And experts can use the platform to showcase the capability. The topic of today's webinar is cybersecurity for startups and scale-ups. And with me are here Ben Krutsen and Daniel Looyens. Both of them are international IT and cybersecurity experts, and they support startups and scale-ups with managing IT risks right from the start. With that, I would like to hand over to Ben and Dan for the webinar. Over to you.
Dan, do you start with introductions?
Yes, if you can share the screen or not.
I am sharing the screen. Is this not working?
I don't see it, but maybe it's because I'm also a presenter at this moment. Can somebody else of the audience confirm they see the screen?
Greg, do you see the screen?
No, I don't see the screen, but I do have your slides, so I can try to share it from here.
Interesting. Sorry about that, guys. It's not good IT risk.
Well, maybe we can start the introduction anyway.
Yeah.
My name is Daan Looyens. I'll just give you a brief introduction of myself. I studied computing science, a PhD from Eindhoven, worked for various companies, my own company called Topforce in Rotterdam. But I started my career with Shell. I ended also my career with Shell, and recently I had another study in cybersecurity from the University of Leiden and Delft. And through Shell, I also met Ben. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so indeed, I'm Ben Krutsen. We shared research experiences in the 90s in the Shell laboratory in Amsterdam. Dan and I then did different IT jobs. I ended with 6 years in cybersecurity in Shell. I spent 4 years in KPMG as a partner in cyber risk. And now we have our company called ValueTracks, where we support startups and scale-ups in the energy transition and sustainability, both with IT risk, but you'll see in this presentation that it means that you basically try and do your IT in a secure manner. So that means we're not just focusing on the security side, but on the general IT strategy and services side as well.
So Erik, if you can go to slide number 3, please. Yeah, thank you. So this webinar is about startups and scale-ups, and just to briefly mention what we mean by that, and also to give the security context. Of course, it also always starts with some ideas, like a smart way to eat hot spaghetti, the picture on the left, and a founder that starts a company or there, and then the company goes through several phases. Formation phase, validation phase, and finally the growth phase there. What is very typical is that the company grows, funding is attracted there, but also IT is more and more acquired from the market or developed in-house. until you become a scale up. And I'm using here an official definition: when the company exists for at least 3 years, having at least 20% ROI, analyzed ROI, return on investment, and at least 10 employees. That's the definition used for scale up, but that's of course a little bit arbitrary. From a security context point of view, is what you see in the beginning of the company, that it's fully focused on client and services there, and also on a sort of survival mode to acquire funding to be able to develop this company there. What you also see is that they're usually not working in a building that's exclusive for themselves. So it's a collective building there. So because physical security is also important, they start small, they will grow, they have a growing team, they have very limited skills in security. Sometimes you see also limited skills in IT, very limited budgets, very tight timelines there, and IP is very important for them because they want to position a unique market proposition. But what you see is that usually it's not very well protected, what we call the crown jewels there. And depending on the case, that IP can attract attention from all sorts of actors in cybersecurity speak, like nation state or competitors there. And this is a little bit how we see the security context around these startups there. So next slide, I will give you some screenshots of what we encounter as ValueTracks when we see these companies or when we do audits for them. We see that usually it's very easy to access their offices and their premises there. And a very easy trick to validate that is possible to do tailgating, like an open door, you just walk behind somebody. What you also see is that keys can also often find on lockers, on our desks, or whatever, and they can be, of course, misused to gain unauthorized access there. So physical security is very important, an important issue in these companies there. On the cybersecurity domain, we see very often the user behaviors like writing passwords down, share laptops, and so on. Networking that can be easily accessed there, and it's not protected. You just plug in a cable in a Wi-Fi access point or a switch or a router. And what we also see is that the overall settings or the configuration of third-party equipment like printers, they are in default settings, default passwords, default URLs, very easy to get access to and obtain credentials. And the same holds, of course, also for equipment. People buy very cheap stuff like Chinese manufacturers. Nothing wrong with equipment from China, but you have to be aware that the security protection is probably much less and use default passwords there. And of course, this creates a lot of issues, not only gaining access to network, but also being unable to protect sensitive data. So next slide, please. If you go back when you engage with these companies there, what we did in the past and still doing, then of course we get questions how can we actually tackle those issues that you find? So where do we start there? And what we bring to the table is that we use the corporate experience from Shell and KPMG and other companies that we worked in the past, and combine it in a smart, agile way to leverage de facto industry standards like cloud services and so on. And we try to convince the client that the way forward is to use what we call zero trust principles. It should not matter if you are in the office or in the internet. Just trust nobody and make sure you have endpoint protection. So for that, we have developed a small framework, a very light framework that that Ben will present next. But what is important in our approach is that it is a risk-based approach, and it's driven by the business of the startup and the scale-up. It's lean and agile, and it's actually a journey. Yeah? So it grows with the size of the state from the company there. And what is unique in this situation is that we can actually leverage the modern way of doing security by offering and introducing these cloud and IT services there. And that gives you an advantage over larger organizations. They usually have a brownfield, have a lot of retrofitting to do. In this case, you have the unique opportunity, and I really encourage you, if you work in such an environment, to get it right according to your risk appetite. So over to Ben, who will take a deep dive in these small blocks. I forgot to mention that we use international standards like NIST and ASIS there, but Ben will definitely take it from here.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, deep dive maybe in such a short period not possible. But what I want to do is show you a bit of content in each of these steps that Dan showed you, and starting with business risk. So what really is the only way to approach security is from a risk side. There are many things that that are a threat. They have many vulnerabilities usually, and to know what is important to you and what you want to fix first, you need to understand your risks. So when we do risks, we solely work on business risks. So we will not call a risk the exploitation of a particular vulnerability, because that is unclear then what that means for the business. So you probably have seen things like this risk matrix on the right-hand side, which is just a sample, where you plot what you consider the relative likelihood and the relative potential business impact of a particular risk. Now, this is not, it's qualitative. These are estimates. These are just to create a visual of what you consider your most important risks. Be careful not to use these things for any calculations, because it's known that risk matrices are not good for that. Then you need other methods. So it's just a visualization of your risks. And then you have, I think for a startup and a scale up, extremely important, not only to look at your current risk, but also at your risks, let's say in 24 to 36 months. Because if you are aware of those emerging risks, then you can tackle them in time before they really materialize. Now, so this then basically drives everything that comes after, and specifically for each of these risks, we will develop a risk scenario. So how can these things actually happen? What initial breach, what movement through your systems, what is the target system, who is the actor? Those are typical key characteristics of a scenario. And below each of these risks, there are in general quite a few scenarios that you need to consider. Yep. So then it's time to look at all the different things you can do to protect yourself. This is after NIST. That's an American cybersecurity standard of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We have adapted that slightly to make it a bit more visually appealing and simple. NIST has 500 something categories, and we condense that down to the boxes that you see here. And important is that you have 4 things here. NIST is actually 5, but that's just through the condensation that we got to 4. 4 things that are important. Identify if you do not understand.
Sorry, Ben. We
Yeah.
have to go to the next slide. I still see. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, that's not very handy. Yeah, I'm looking at another screen. So here you see this connection of this collection of NIST capabilities. Yeah, these are capabilities to protect yourself, and you see identify that is actually understanding your risk. That's actually pretty cheap and unbelievably important. Yeah, I always say people can have a very high risk appetite and not do a lot of the protection because they feel comfortable with taking that risk. But if you do not know what your risk is, then that's not a decision you take consciously. It's just an assumption that you're making, and that is more dangerous. And because it's cheap to do identify, we always say go and do your identify, and then you can look at which other capabilities you need. It's also important for us to color code these things according to those business risks. So some of these risks may not be that important for your company, and then to put them in red on a visual is not smart. So we do these assessments and we put these colors on so that we know where to focus in the next stages. And there is a similar, very similar, and you can imagine that very similar standard for physical security, which also is about identifying your risks and protecting yourself and detection, alarm systems, and response. And that's from ACES International that we also use. I haven't shown it here, just to be brief. Then if we can go to the next slide. Yep, the pen and intrusion tests. So penetration tests for cyber and intrusion tests for physical. Sometimes we are asked, why would we do this? We've seen the capabilities at a high level. Why would we actually do a proper pen test? Because that's specialist work. It takes a bit of time, but this is really essential to get a good grip on where you really are. Because you can do interviews, you can look at documents, but to truly understand what the security of your environment really is, you need to go and look at in detail. So we look at what the threats are for a particular environment. Then you try and break in, like ethical hacking. That's the testing. And then we do configuration reviews. So we look at the security configuration of different systems. Often find lots of misconfigurations which make them vulnerable. Then there is a network analysis that we look at the traffic to see if there's already actually some compromise happening. Also to find, for example, if there are any unwanted connections between the different parts of your business, the office domain and the manufacturing domain, which you may not realize you have. I mean the connections, of course. And then we go and write down what we found, and we map it back to the capabilities that you saw on the previous slide, and we come up with the mitigations. And those mitigations, if I may see the next slide, please, they consist of two things. One is the remediation actions. So those are short-term actions that do not have big dependencies on other things that are happening, that have good bang for the buck, and that really can bring down the risk significantly. What is important here is that when you do these things, that you have good quality control over them, because sometimes people think they fixed something, but then they've forgotten one or two things, and then your vulnerability may still exist. If you need people to help you there, then it's smart to think about what services you are buying or are going to buy, and engage the people in that environment, in that service provider, to help you, because that makes the transition later easier. And then, of course, when you've done this, think about the emerging risk, and the projects that you're already doing for the next stages. For example, you're going to do some manufacturing network, etc. Now you know what went wrong with what you already had. You know what to look for in these new projects and make sure that you got it designed from the start in a secure manner. The other part of your response to the findings would be a journey, a roadmap, which is on the next slide. Yeah, so that roadmap is interestingly quite different, we think, for a startup and a scale up than you would typically see in a larger environment, corporate environment. Because in the corporate environment, you have lots of legacy IT of stuff that is there, you cannot easily change. That's used extensively and connected to all sorts of other systems. So replacing stuff, changing it is really difficult. So what you then do is you do all sorts of things to try and still get rid of the vulnerabilities. Yeah. A very simple example, you might put a web application firewall in front of a particular application, web-based application that you find difficult to make secure. But here, you often in startups and scale-ups have little IT yet. So it's quite easy to change that out for something that will be more secure and that can then scale with you over the next phases and help you to not only have better IT, but also secure IT. And here, making use of new services, both IT, let's say managed desktop with Intune from Microsoft to manage the configuration of the devices, to make sure they have BitLocker turned on, disk encryption turned on, and things like that. You can really do some pretty sophisticated things with a cloud-based service that's actually not that expensive. That's a big step forward. The availability of these services, we see that they are not very well used in smaller organizations, and that is because you need to have some knowledge about how to actually deploy these things, how to configure them, and how to make best use of them. And because they're continuously changing, because all of these companies are pouring enormous amounts of money into the development of these services, it really is a bit of a specialist job to make sure that you know how to do it. And what we have done is we have started to build blueprints for particular areas where we not only say what the right portfolio of services is or a good portfolio of services, but also how you actually deploy them and configure them. So that creates, I think, a big opportunity to do your IT and security better. And of course, everything in a roadmap is always connected to what is this going to look like in 3 to 5 years, and what small steps can I take in the right direction, knowing where I'm going, such that every decision I'm taking on every next step is actually informed by the longer term vision of the company and its IT. I think that was my part. Dan, do you want to take over?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ben. So we're coming at the last slide and the last messaging there. It's about getting help. Of course, if you work in a startup or a scale up, you ask yourself, do I need help, or why do I need help there? We believe that even if you have a high risk appetite, it's worthwhile to actually understand your risk there. So that's why we offer these short audits, time box there, where we actually leverage also our internal networks, or not internal networks, external networks, I mean, from experts there, because security is quite technical. Sometimes it goes very deep in terms of skills that you need to apply for pen testing or network analysis there. But we can offer you that help with our network there. And what's also important is that if going forward, if you look into how to secure your IT domain or your manufacturing operational domain, that you can actually leverage this modern way that gives you the unique opportunity as a startup or scale up there. So we offer access to those experts there as well, and that is actually a unique opportunity, because if you get your IT right, then usually the security is also in a much better shape there. For your company yourself, well, it's clear you're very busy getting funds, growing, meeting milestones there, but it's understanding this environment is something that we as entrepreneurs ourselves understand there, and this dynamic environment can actually help you to also to make the right choices if you get help from experts like ourselves there. Of course, there's always discussion around budgets and timelines there. What we offer is a very lean and agile approach. We time box our activities. We make sure that that the commercial offerings are not open-ended there, and then we can actually grow with your company to make sure that these blueprints that we have developed can be applied in the proper way by applying, of course, the activities from the roadmap. So in short, if you even if you are not convinced yet and say, well, I have my own people there, I think it's still worthwhile to have an independent audit there, because you want this to be business led. You want to know your key assets and how to protect them. You want to know also your risk appetite there, and getting help. I think it's quite advisable in this domain. So thank you for that. Maybe we can have some questions and Q&A.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ben and Daniel, for all the insights shared. There are actually already quite a number of questions I see, and if any one of you has questions, then you can put them in the Q&A box on the left-hand side. So let me start with one. Could you give an example of a misconfiguration? Is one of the questions being asked.
Yes, I'm not sure if it's a fully misconfiguration, but for example, I showed the picture of the printers there. What we see, people, of course, want also to print documents in these companies there. And a misconfiguration is that you actually broadcast the printer to the building, because it also has an internal often a Wi-Fi capability there to facilitate printing from your iPhone or other mobile devices. And if it's not properly configured like default, then sometimes there's not even HTTPS on it, or the default password like 4 zeros is available, and then you can actually have an access point, a bridge into your Wi-Fi network, because you can then read the printer configuration and exploit that to get access to the internal network that you thought was secure. So just connecting a printer and misconfiguring it in the wrong way already gives a quite big vulnerability in terms of being exploited from other parties.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, another question. So hacks happen all the time. So there were a couple of key examples in the news lately here in the Netherlands. Does that mean that that people become more advanced, or do companies simply not have their house in order? Can you perhaps say a few words about that?
Yeah, let me try that one. So I think what's important to realize that cybersecurity on the criminal side is just business. They are really good entrepreneurs often. There's lots of money to be made. They work together in unbelievable ways. They sometimes have help desks somewhere in the East Bloc of hundreds of people that provide a fantastic service. If you have been ransomware, for example, you can go there and ask them questions, get very good help. So you have to imagine that they have a very big incentive to become better at what they're doing, to be more smart about who they attack and with what tools. They share tools. You can buy tools on the darknet. So that is there. If you would put a not protected, stick the malware, anti-malware off your PC, hook it onto the internet, and probably within an hour you're part of a botnet, because that's just spraying stuff which they're doing. That's not targeted. So yeah, I think that's one side of it. So there is ever increasing sophistication and actually also volume in attacks. And then we have to say that although people often use reasonable endpoints with some anti-malware on it, the old virus scanner, certainly if you have networks in companies and you have servers and you have all sorts of stuff that's communicating with the internet, we have to say that very few companies actually have the configuration of those networks and of the devices, as well as some basic detection and response capability. I can actually see that something is wrong. And can I act? Do I know that my data is being exfiltrated? Often people don't even know that they have been breached. So that's the case. So most companies, even if they try, they do not get very far in protecting themselves. Although it is very, very possible, but it needs attention. It's not coming, it's not going to be there by itself. And if you just have a few IT people that already are overloaded trying to make sure that people's IT work, expecting them to make sure that everything is secure as well is just not reasonable. So that's, I think, the state. And then if you're in a particular area where targeted attacks are actually possible, because you have technology that's really interesting for competition on nation states, then it even gets more difficult to protect yourself. Even if you have done your configurations right, then you get social engineering and phishing and business email compromise. And you have to really look very much at the user behavior as well. It's always important, but even more important if you're a target, particular target of specific attacks.
Thanks for that, Ben. So very clear. Also, one other question. So you showed a risk matrix as part of the presentation. Can you give an indication? So how many risks do you typically capture in such a risk matrix? Just to get an idea.
Yeah, I think not too many. What you see here as a sample, I would say I wouldn't go beyond 10 or so. It's also always a matter of lumping things together. You could split out each one of these into 10 different bubbles, but then it becomes unwieldy to look at. So we do that a bit in a flexible manner to make sure that what you see in the end is something that convinces the business that they have a good view on what these risks actually are. But as I said before, below this, the scenarios that can lead to IP leakage, if, for example, 4 or 5 initial breach steps, and then there's lots of lateral movement, and then maybe you have, I don't know, a couple of systems, maybe 5 systems in which you have IP, and they can all be targeted. So underneath, and that's the problem with security underneath the pathways. There are manifold. And if you forget classes of them, you can protect against particular attack paths. But if you know, it's like leaving the front door, you know, you lock your front door, but you have the back door open. And so you really have to do a thorough job in looking at these pathways.
Very clear. Thank you. There's one other question coming in. How would you detect breaches not recognized by the endpoint security software? And what additional risks are present by using cloud services?
Okay. Do you want to do the detection one?
Detection, yeah. So if your endpoint software is not detecting breaches, of course, you can still invest in software that does network analysis there. And nowadays, there's a whole set of companies like Sentinel-1 and other companies who use smart ways of building the threat landscapes on the network there. So they're using AI technologies where they only start to actually build up that threat by seeing certain patterns in the traffic there until they say, well, this is very typical for my botnet there, and then they raised an alarm there. So that's on the detection side. There is, yeah, so using I would say complementary detection software that you can actually make available on your network.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I can add to that. One of the very powerful things that you can do in terms of detection is that you look at anomalies in access. And so you look at your access management systems and you try and find patterns that are not business as usual. That's pretty strong because it's close to the data that you really want to protect. So whatever happens elsewhere in the network or on your endpoint, as long as people do not access the data that you care about, then of course there's less risk. So that's also one. And on the endpoints itself, there was huge development, and Dan named Sentinel-1. There are a couple of others. They call it now endpoint detection and response, because you can basically also go into these endpoints and see what is going on, and you can respond. You can actually stop certain things from happening on your endpoint, which was not possible. So antivirus in the past did quarantine some stuff, but here you talk about pretty advanced attacks that they can actually block, or they can just alarm you. So that's a whole area in its own. And I think the key takeaway from that space is that just the antivirus of the past is not actually certainly not telling you whether you're compromised or not. It's a hygiene thing to have it, but it doesn't give you any detection capability.
Yeah, thanks for
So
that.
we also had the question on the cloud, the additional risk of the cloud services. You want to comment on that, Ben?
Yeah, let's take that from two sides. So first of all, I think that if you would look in general, how in practice companies are able to protect their on-premise, their own servers, yeah, their on-premise environments, and I compare that to the quality with which Amazon and Microsoft and of course Google and even IBM, etc., how they protect their environment, I think I would almost say it's day and night for many companies. So the cloud is definitely better protected. There's more there that is done properly. Lots is automated. These huge hyperscalers, as we call them, they have minimum amounts of admins, while in a typical company, admin rights are everywhere, and sometimes hundreds of people have admin rights, can make mistakes or can actually do stuff deliberately wrong. So in that sense, I think the move from on-premise to cloud in general will give you better protection. But you have to know what you're doing when you go to the cloud, because you expose your applications to the internet. So they are continuously attacked. You need to know that your applications are sound. Now, if you use SaaS services, it's somebody else's job, and they usually have an extremely big incentive to get that right, because otherwise everybody walks and the whole business is down, is gone, I would say. But yeah, sometimes people do also stupid things in the cloud. We had this example of a company that was born in the cloud. That basically was just a cloud software company. And they had the same account for the backups as for their production system. The production system got compromised and wiped out, and also the backup got wiped out, and the company didn't exist anymore. Gone. Now, was that a problem of the cloud? I don't think so. I think it's you have to keep thinking if you use the cloud. And it's a bit different, so you need a bit different skills of looking at the security. But in general, our approach is always to say to companies, please do not use your own servers. Please go and use cloud services and cloud applications, because in general they're better.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ben and Daan, for the answers. And there's one more question here. Is it recommended to put additional protection in place for IP? And if yes, what would it be?
Do you want to do that, Dan? Or?
Yeah, I can make a start there. So of course, there are always questions about IP. What is the IP? Is it the documentation that you have? Is it the software that you want to protect? Is it your data, your database of customers, or whatever? So that's the first question you have to ask yourself. And depending on what it is that you want to protect, you can, we would indeed recommend to use then cloud services and put additional protection in place. And that can be already as simple as making sure you have proper access management there, like two-factor authentication to get into that data or to those documents there. But also, if it's software, that you have separation of your development, production, and testing streets there, where the production data it's a different cloud environment. Can be still with the same hyperscaler, but in a different setting than your development environment there. Yes, so indeed, it's very much recommendable to put that in place there from day one.
Yeah, maybe to just add one sentence to that. What people do with what they call crown jewel analysis. So you cannot protect everything. So make a list of the crown jewels, and the crown jewels can relate to IP, but it can also relate to certain operational things that you deliver to clients, etc. But have a list of the crown jewels, the things in the IT environment, your own and in the cloud, that matter most to you. And then for each of them, go and do some specific things to protect them. Is a general approach in the industry to do that.
Yeah, excellent. I think there are no more questions, and it's almost 1:45. So suggest we round off here. So many thanks, Ben and Daniel, for presenting. It's a key topic for many startups and scale-ups, including the company that I co-founded. So that's one of the reasons why we decided to do this webinar and also share this knowledge with the many companies in our network. So many thanks. Apologies for some of the IT issues at the start, and also understand that not all of you were able to see the slides. So the recording will be made available, and so you will receive that. And of course, if you have any questions to Ben and Dan, you can approach them directly. So many thanks for the presentation, great insights, and I wish everyone on the call, wish you all a great day, and see you during the next webinar or at a different event. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.